Then here is the first brain, I guess, in a talk on neuroscience, I had to show at least one brain. I won't go into any details. You know, we're not neuroscientists here, and I don't think you're interested in becoming one. But you know, one of the things that we found as we started talking to each other is that actually neuroscientists already had the same notion of exploration and exploitation. There was even an article published in 2005 that actually used the same language, which we use when we were talking about innovation. And they were actually showing that the two fundamental mechanisms for exploration and exploitation actually are located in two different systems, connected, particularly the exploration more on, with the cortex, the exploitation more with the limbic system. And the most interesting part of all, they found that there is a switching. There's this light blue thing called locus ceruleus, which in Latin just means blue, light blue center, which is really in the oldest part of the brain that, well, until 10 or 15 years ago, it was considered just to be a switch in terms of level of consciousness, from being asleep to being awakened. And it turns out that this actually can be the switch between exploration and exploitation, between two radically different ways in which the brain learns, okay, or tries to innovate. And therefore, again, we have the first show and the first demonstration that actually what we have seen at the organizational level might be founded on some fairly objective and clear kind of biological basis, which was already an interesting beginning. Those of you who are interested, there's the paper here has been already published, so I'll be happy to share it with you. Now, so that was the conceptual groundwork, right? Because we hadn't seen any data until that point. Now, we went out obviously to do some empirical work, and we started to think about how to do it. Now, of course, we wanted to look at both managers and entrepreneurs. We needed to witness them while they were making these decisions. And of course, imagine putting, in this case, 25 entrepreneurs and 28 managers into a brain scan while they were making obviously simplified exploration and exploitation decisions. Very simple, but very repetitive, because that's what is necessary in order to be able to really make sense, make sure that we're capturing the neural correlations. What happens basically to the oxygen in the brain when they're making those type of decisions. Now, I won't go too much in detail, but we were able to actually do this. I'm just going to show you briefly the distinctions that we have found, right? The key here is really to compare the two populations of managers and entrepreneurs on one side, but even at the beginning, even before we get into the comparison between managers and entrepreneurs, simply understand the two decisions, right? This exploration and exploitation decision in human beings were never really witnessed, okay? That paper that I was talking about before was done on monkeys. Now, which, obviously they're not the same thing. The issue here is, well, the finding were actually quite interesting. Exploitation, so trying to focusing your attention to do better what you already are doing, right? To improve what you're doing, is really connected to our interests, our essentially emotional component. It's the joy, it's the reward, the expectations of reward, right?
Maurizio, I have to ask you to go to the last slide.
The last, there you go. Very good.
Can you maybe explain what it is, exploitation and exploration, in practical behavior?
Just basically think about when you try to figure out how to do your job better, okay? Like how to improve a task that you're doing on a normal basis. How do I interact with my clients better, right? Better than I used to be doing?
Okay,
exploration is how to do something very different, not interacting with a client, but for example, interacting with a supplier, or rather than selling, doing something significantly different. You can look at this in this case. It was the example. I mean, the game that we used was a game of gambling where you had to choose whether to keep on gambling on the same slot machine rather than changing the slot machine because you were not satisfied with the outcomes. Okay, and so there are a number of applications, of course, but we saw radically different activations in the brain. Right here, exploration actually requires withdrawal from pleasure, for immediate pleasure, and actually concentrating on more long term, and the planning activity, what are called the executive functions, right? So being able to actually see the future, as we were saying again before, and the question is how this is done. So the most interesting distinction between managers and entrepreneurs comes into the exploration part, because it turns out that entrepreneurs, I won't go into this because I don't have the time, but I will give you the key results of the distinction between entrepreneurs and managers. Well, it turns out that entrepreneurs not only are capable to switch between the two modes of thinking much faster, so much more, that locus ceruleus that I was talking about before is much more active in entrepreneurs than in managers. But also the exploration activity is done in a way much better, much broader. They use both much more the cortex, the front side, but on both sides, both left and right side. Whereas in the management sample, we saw primarily the frontal, but the left side, the one that is connected to more, thinking processes, the more cognitive, purely cognitive, without the emotional component, which is on the right side. I don't have time to go in details. I was at the conclusion, and actually I think it simply summarizes this type of initial findings. Let me close with the next steps, because I think maybe we can use this for the Q&A. Where are we going? Well, the fundamental question that we are now tackling is how do we develop these activities, right? These capabilities, these cognitive capabilities, these shifting capabilities, these abilities to explore, right, using, for example, both sides of the frontal components of our brain. How do we make that, leveraging this amazing capacity of the brain to plastically evolve? We should be able to find ways, effective ways, to actually develop this. And then, moving beyond innovation contexts, we're fascinated by the entire issue of corporate responsibility and sustainability at the individual level. How do we make sense of the fact that two managers, again, in the same company, might have radically different ways to think about the same decision with respect to the long-term versus short-term orientation, time horizon, with respect to the ethical value, with respect to empathic kind of notions, and of course the creative elements which we already talked about. And we're thinking about new and maybe less standard ways to study the interventions, the learning processes. So, for example, using meditation and introspection, which again goes back to some of the ideas that we already heard, as much more profound and potentially effective ways to have these type of developments, evolve within reasonable time frames in human brains. And now I will leave it at that, and thank you very much for your attention.